All right, students, welcome back. Let me adjust the camera here. All right, hopefully you can hear me. Like I said, I'm outside. Uh, what a beautiful day. Absolutely gorgeous day. Had a bad round of storms yesterday, and man, it has made up for it today. It is absolutely gorgeous. So I'm hoping you're able to get outside, enjoy this beautiful weather we're having. I am so glad summer's here. Hopefully, the summertime heat will get rid of this virus and knock it out, and we can all get back to normal. Because I'm telling you, it's making me crazy. All right, real quick, I got two things that I want to accomplish in this video. Number one, I want to give you a brief intro to literary analysis and to give you an explanation of a definition for it, and then why we perform this analysis whenever we're reading any piece of text. And the other thing I'm going to start off with is to tell you a little story, and I do this in all of my classes. It doesn't matter if I'm teaching English Comp 1, Comp 2, if they ask me to teach a college success class, or in one of the more specialized courses with Brit Lit or mythology. Because to me, and it may be because of my background, as I told you about in the Meet the Professor video, I am a scholar in ancient story. Sorry, I keep touching my face. I'm itchy. I am a scholar in the ancient literature and medieval time period, and everything for that tends to go back to Plato. And so I want to start off this lecture telling you a little story about Plato. Of course, Plato was a Greek philosopher, one of the three most prominent Greek philosophers, and these guys were considered the founders, the fathers of Western civilization, philosophy, and thought. You can study scholars in the medieval time period and the Renaissance, all the way through the Victorian period and here in the modern period, and you're going to find little elements of these guys going all the way back to 3,000 years. Because everything builds upon itself as from a foundation all the way through the structure. And so Plato, for those of you who don't know, Plato was a Greek philosopher who studied under the famous Socrates. And most of Plato's writings were based around conversations that Socrates had with his students in the classroom. And of course, Plato continued that tradition. And Plato had another student, which most Western law and political structures were founded upon, and his name was Aristotle. And Aristotle, continued that tradition as well of having the outdoor classrooms and teaching, the next generation of Greek leaders. And for those of you who don't know, he had probably one of the most famous Hellenistic students that to come out of this time period, which was Alexander the Great. So a lot of people don't know that. So there is almost this family relationship between all of these people, leading all the way down to Alexander. But Plato was really focused on explaining the physical world and why the world around them, through this pseudo-scientific method, existed. And so he focused primarily on two aspects. And one is the ideal, and the other one is the real or reality. And as he demonstrated several times in his writings, the one place that you can find the symbol of perfection, okay, that which is conceived to be perfect, is right here in the mind, in the ideal, okay? And that's where one realm of existence resides. The other is, of course, the physical world, the real. And the real is a direct reflection or uh, derives from that which is ideal. And because it's not necessarily a one-to-one copy, as Plato said, that's why everything around us seems to be, although it's beautiful, somewhat imperfect. Okay. And it's one of the reasons, in a pseudo-scientific way, he explained why the world around him was sometimes comfortable and other times hostile, why people were sometimes warm and friendly and then other times tended to be angry and violent. And it's because of that loss of perfection that happens when that which exists in the ideal, in the imaginary or the ethereal, is brought down to the physical level, and is allowed to exist in the real, is because it's an imperfection here. Having said all that, Plato told this interesting story, and I'll have a PowerPoint uploaded, and that will go along with this, so that as you watch this video back, you can actually look through the PowerPoint and follow along, with looking at the graphics and stuff, so you can have a visual in your mind as I'm telling the story. So Plato told this story when he was asked about perceptions and what perceptions were allowed, accepted as valid, versus which perceptions are determined to be invalid, and what is the measuring stick, what is the tool. And again, this kind of goes back to Plato's focus, in that it's a hard thing to reason and determine, when you're living in this physical realm, which does not have that hint of perfection. I mean, it has a hint of perfection, but it's not perfect. Okay. So he told the story, and it basically goes like this. There were 3 or 4 people who were living in this cave, and they were prisoners. Okay. So I want you to kind of picture in your mind's eye, you have this huge cave. Okay. And along the one end of the wall of the cave, you had places like chains, like up here, up against the wall. And there were 4 people that were chained to this wall. They were prisoners within this cave. What we know, a little bit that we know about them, is they were born into this kind of bondage. They were born into this imprisonment. The cave is all they've ever known from birth. We don't know why they were in the cave, why they were bound prisoners, but they were. And so, picture it like right now, these guys who were just chained to this wall. They were fed and, whatnot. They were kept alive, but their whole existence was living in this dark place, okay, in this cave, chained to this wall, okay? And they were looking against the other side of the cave, along the opposite wall across the way. On this wall, there was a reflection, okay? And the reflection on this wall had a certain shape to it. And so as you can picture this, these guys chained to the wall, this was the only thing they were allowed to see on this wall. And they debated it about what this reflection was. They didn't even realize it was a reflection. They just knew it was there. It existed. Okay? So this thing that was abstract in their vision, directly across the room from them, along this wall, to them was real. And they debated about what this entity or what this figure was intensely. And none of them agreed. One person thought it was a dragon, another was some other kind of mystical creature, and another, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head, and I don't have my notes in front of me. But the basis of the story is each person saw something different from their own perception of reality. Okay. Now, as we of the outside, what do we know about this cave? Well, we know what Plato tells us is that these four guys were chained to the wall. They saw this reflection on the wall across, or the opposite wall across from them. And that reflection was created because there was a little bit of light coming in from the outside world into this cave. And there was an object in front of it. Okay? So, what you have is something that exists outside of their reality that's casting a shadow into their reality. They can't see the actual object, they can just see the reflection of it. And they each see something differently. Okay? So, what happens? Well, for some reason, and I don't even think it's important to know the reason, Plato uses it as a device within his story. One of the prisoners was allowed to leave the cave to visit the real world, quote unquote real world, okay, the outside world. So long story short, because I don't want to go too long because this is a video, this prisoner was allowed to leave the cave and was actually able to see what the object was. He was able to see the outside world. He was able to see a whole world of existence that was outside of his comfort zone. Okay? Outside of what he perceived to be real in the world. And so it didn't take too long. Hold on, I got a big truck. A big truck is coming by. My street is normally quiet, but for some reason today everybody is just getting out and about and just going crazy, probably because cabin fever. Anyway, so this prisoner was allowed to enter a world outside of his own perception, and it caused such distress he wanted to come back to the cave. Okay. And he was allowed to come back to the cave. And they told him, well, if you're allowed to come back, you're going to have to go back to the wall. Okay, that's fine. I'm going back to the wall. So when he gets back to the cave and they chain him up, the other guys ask him, hey, what did you see? And so he tells them. None of them believe him. And he's like, well, I saw it. Well, yeah, but we didn't see it. We see what's in front of us. We know what's true. Each one of us sees something different, but you can't convince us otherwise. So, long story short, I can spend a whole probably 2 or 3 courses deeply analyzing Allegory of the Cave. But this is just for an intro. Mr. Davis, why are you telling us this weird story? Well, because at its core, it really describes all of us. It really describes your motivations for being here, for taking this course, for taking other courses within college. Why? Because you have been living within this realm which you've perceived to be real all of your life since you were a little baby, all the way through elementary school and into high school. And now you're at a point to where you feel like there's something more than the world that you've known around you. And you're asking questions. Why? Because you're wanting to understand whether or not your perceptions of what is real and your place in that reality is where you really need to be, or do you want to be somewhere different? Okay? Another reason for the story is because in analyzing literary text, we have what we call an allegorical situation, and then we also have what we call an applicable situation. Okay, allegory is basically someone in the position of authority, and I say that word again, authority, because it'll come back up, determines that this perception that is being presented to all of you is valid. Okay. Why is it valid? Because I say it's that it's valid. I'm the authority on the subject. Okay. If I write a story as an author, I'm claiming authorship over the content within that text, saying this is the reason for the text. These are the reasons for my organizing and arranging the text in a certain way. This is the reason why the characters are who they are, the scene, the theme, all of these things. And that's authorship. Okay, exercising your authority as an author. That's called authorship. I misspoke there. Okay. Now, does that mean we as readers don't have any say-so into it? No. But it's a different perception. Okay? So going back to the cave, the object that the light is shining through, that object is the author's perception flowing into the cave, or the author's picture or representation of real that's coming into the cave being shown on the wall. We as readers, we're the prisoners. Okay? We're bound to this text. And we're trying to figure out what this text, this image that's being shown on the wall or the back of our minds, the movie screen in our minds. What is this image? What is its purpose? Why is it even important? That's a viewpoint of that image that's on the wall. And each one of us have one. That's what we call applicability. Okay? The perception of what is real on the wall is applicable to us based on our own experiences or on our own perceptions of what is real. And as each prisoner on the wall has a different mind, has a different background, has a different core set of experiences, you're going to see something different. Okay? Now, having said all that, am I stating that the author is not also bound to the cave? No. But the author is the one that was allowed to go out, to have a viewpoint, to create this either imaginary world or his or her own perception of the real world and create a new story. And that's that image that's being cast on the wall. Okay? So you have two opposing viewpoints. Not necessarily in opposition, but two different viewpoints coming together. The author and the reader. The author's is allegorical, okay, because the authorship is proclaimed by the author over the subject matter. The reader doesn't really have authority, although some claim that they do. You think of Peter Jackson as one, the director who created Lord of the Rings. Never mind. That's a whole nother. That's a whole nother video. Anyway, but readers have that perception of what is on the wall. We have authorship over our own viewpoint, our own perception, but we have to recognize that that image is only applicable to us because of our own experiences and our unique experiences. Okay, so to wrap it up, that's the reason why I tell this story. And as you as a student coming into this class, you're going to encounter many different images on that wall through the different texts that we read, prose, poetry, and drama. There's going to be many different images on that wall. There's going to be an intended purpose for each one of those images based on the author that has composed it. But you're going to have a little say-so as well on what you believe that image on the wall really is. Okay? So, now, having said all that, I'm going to move on to the next portion. How do we do this? Mr. Davis, that's all fine and dandy. I see the image on the wall, but how am I going to do this? I mean, I'm just a student in a class. Okay? So was I. I learned these principles and I use them every day, not only to analyze works and what I read, but I use them every day. I'm dealing with people, working in a job. Okay. So, Plato's Allegory of the Cave, lesson number 1. Here comes lesson number 2. And the lesson number 2 centers on literary analysis. I got a bunch of notes here that I'm going to read to you. Okay. Now, don't feel a bunch of anxiety because I'm not going to ask you to memorize all this stuff. I am going to ask you to download the PowerPoint that is going to be available in conjunction with this lecture so that you can have this core set of skills printed out, or these skill sets printed out, okay, these topics printed out, and place them in the area in which you're going to study. While you're reading the works, have these printed out so that as you're taking notes, you're thinking about these things in the back of your mind and making sure that you're covering all the bases, okay? Because those notes that you take based on these key aspects that I'm going to be talking about are going to form the basis for your essays, okay? Because what you're going to do is you're going to interpret the works using this as a yardstick, and you're going to present your perspective on these works using this and a few outside sources, outside readings, to assist you in doing that. Okay, so I'm already at 21 minutes, so I don't want to go too long and make the server overload with this huge video. So anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through these real quick. Okay, and like I said, they will be available to you in a PowerPoint, and you can print these out. Okay, so literary analysis. What are we talking about? Well, we're talking about being able to have a group of identifiers to think about while we're reading a piece of text. So the best example I can give you is, how many of you have ever watched a murder mystery, whether it's a TV show or a movie? Okay. You start the show, some things happen, some people, a person dies, and your whole job as the viewer is to figure out who did it, where it took place, what weapon was used, right? Those are identifiers in a murder mystery. Well, same thing here, okay? So how do we do that? Well, number 1, literary element number 1 that we analyze is called character, okay? Every story should have a character, a main character that you care about, and it should have a group of supporting characters that either helps that main character or works against that main character in order to achieve a certain outcome. If it doesn't, at the very base, have those things, it's not a very good story. It's not worth reading. And believe me, I've seen plenty of those out there. All right, so literary element number 1, character. Okay, what is character? It's a representation of a person or a thing, that's performing a traditional human activity or a function in a work of fiction. Okay, characters come in different flavors. They come in different varieties. Okay, the main form in which character is seen in literature is a protagonist. Okay, so what is a protagonist? A protagonist is a character that the story revolves around. That's your main character. That's like Romeo and Juliet. That's the character of Romeo and Juliet. Okay, they're the main protagonists in that story. An antagonist could be a main character or it could be a supporting character, but is a character that's working against the protagonist. Okay, so that's the character or force that opposes the protagonist of the story. Okay, then you have a bunch of other little supporting cast members, right? So let's look at Romeo and Juliet. Protagonist would be Romeo and Juliet. Antagonist would be the parents. They're working against the children, trying to control them, trying to force them to live life their way. Juliet's cousin Tybalt. He's an antagonist. He's opposing Romeo throughout the whole story. Then you have these bunch of minor characters that sit back and they kind of come in and they serve as comic relief, or they perform a certain action to support the main character or group of main characters, or maybe even the antagonist. And so they often, like I said, they often support and illuminate. That is basically their only function. Mercutio is one who I think of in Romeo and Juliet. He serves almost like as a literary device of foreshadowing and stuff. So again, it may be a minor character, but not minor in its purpose. Okay. And then you have various other character traits that may or may not be applicable to this class, but I'll run over them real quick. We have static characters, someone who tends to remain the same and constant. Those tend to be like your narrators and plot movers and stuff. Then you have these dynamic characters who tend to shift and change with the winds depending on what the situation is. Okay. And then we have what we call characterization. And what characterization is the method in which the author uses to either reveal a character's personality traits or intentions, hidden intentions, or even to explain why a character's motivations are what they are. They can either be in your face, active, or they can be somewhat subtle, kind of hidden clues like your murder mystery. Okay. So how do we use character? Well, character, within the stories we usually make notes about the main characters, what their personality traits are, what types of words that they use, especially with other people. So how they treat other people are good notes to take when you're analyzing someone's character. A lot of times, sometimes the author will allow you to kind of get into the character's mind. So whenever they create situations to where a character is off to the side and reveals through a soliloquy, the thoughts that they're thinking at the time, a lot of times that's a very key moment in the story where you really kind of dive into what the motivations and ambitions and purpose for the characters are. Okay, so definitely make notes of that. Again, this is just an intro. I'm not expecting you to, start galloping out the gate. When we talk about the first reading, Hawthorne's The Bookmark, I will go back over this list and show you how to use them. I just want to introduce them to you first right now. Then we have plot. Okay, a plot, that's literary element number 2. A plot is how the ideas are arranged within the story and really make up the actions of the story. In other words, we call this a sequence of events and actions of characters who come together. It's basically your Google or your Apple Maps roadmap. Okay, so if you're going to go somewhere, say you want to take a trip to Disney or another location, you go into your app and you put in your starting destination, your ending destination. The plot is that whole pathway from point A to point B. Okay, plot's very important because a lot of times that plot can either be driven by a character, or if it's strong enough, it can actually drive the actions of other characters. And we'll talk about that later, but that's another good analysis tool that you will use. Okay, so we have a whole bunch of sub-topics within this overarching aspect of plot. One is the use of foreshadowing. So I mentioned Mercutio a while ago. He makes this declaration, a plague on both your houses. Okay, when in the middle of Romeo and Juliet, when he's killed by Tybalt, he's a plague on both your houses. You have made worms meat of me. Okay, that is a moment where that is what we call foreshadowing within the plot. He's actually proclaiming, the author is proclaiming through Mercutio what is about to happen later down the road. Okay, the best way I can illustrate that to you is when you're on your journey into a place, when you put your map, your route into your maps, You seen those signs that flash up over the interstate that says, hey, caution, road work ahead? That's what foreshadowing is. It's very much like that. So it's little indications that throw up a little warning sign to you. Hey, be cautious, something's about to happen. Then we have what we call conflict, okay? Without conflict within the story, there's really no, it's a boring story, okay? You need to have some type of conflict, some kind of tension that occurs between characters to really move and drive a story, okay? So conflict is that struggle, that opposition that happens between two characters or a group of characters or whatnot, okay? So there's foreshadowing, there's conflict. We also have what we call exposition, and exposition is basically the beginning of the tale within the first couple of chapters, or mainly within the first chapter. It's the point, the words that are used by the author to kind of set the stage for the story, okay? This is where we are, this is where we're going. A good example of that is the first sonnet at the beginning of Romeo and Juliet, where he proclaims two households, both alike in dignity in fair Verona, where we lay our scene. Okay, that's an exposition. That's the author proclaiming, this is where we are, these are the people that we're going to talk about, and these are the events that's going to take place. Okay, sometimes it's that open, sometimes it's a little more subtle. So that's one of the things you'll have to be able to pick up on. Okay. So going back to conflict, we have these things called rising actions and falling actions. Okay. And then you have that crisis point right there at the apex within the conflict. We will talk about that more in depth. But in a nutshell, a rising action is that action that takes place within the story that really gets that conflict between characters going. Okay, so the moment within Romeo and Juliet's a good action of that is when Romeo kills Tybalt. And that starts to set the whole stage for a whole bunch of things that are happening. That conflict is as a result. So you have that rise in action, that crisis point at the top, and then the falling action as a fallout to that. Okay, again, we'll talk about more of that in depth later. All right, so plot. Within plot, you also have that setting. Okay, so setting is a kind of related to plot. In a way, it kind of defines the area in which the story has taken place, the time period. Why is that important? Well, the time periods can affect people's attitudes. The culture changes over time. So characters who react a certain way now maybe would react differently 100 years ago. If this were the longer course, we'd actually look at a story that would show you that. But this being more of an abbreviated, quicker course, I had to cut that one out. Okay, so moving right along, we talked about character. We talked about the sub-elements of character. Now we're talking about plot and setting. Okay, and now the sub-elements on that work. Now, the last major one that I want to talk about in this video is theme. Okay, theme is basically a combination of that character and plot coming together to create the whole purpose of the story. Okay, so themes are big ideas that authors use in order to set the stage for the story itself. Okay, so theme is derived in either one of two ways. One, the character or characters are so dominant that they actually drive the plot of the story. In that relationship, you have the characters moving the plot creates one type of theme. Okay, or you may have an instance where the plot is dominant, okay, over the characters. That can create a whole totally different theme. Okay, examples of that would be most stories are where characters are driving the plot. I'm trying to think off the top of my head. One good example, if you've ever seen the movie Day After Tomorrow, about the whole climate shift and how the world enters a new ice age. That is a great example of how the plot, the environment, the time in which they're living, the location is kind of driving the characters. Okay, and it's a totally different theme than if the characters were in control. All right. Sub elements to theme. Well, how do we analyze a theme? Well, there's one of two ways, and it goes back to the Plato story that I told you about a while ago. So, the author, who has the authority of setting the stage for the story, creates the image that's outside of the cave. Okay? That's called allegory. That's the author's intention for the story. If a character in the story represents something in reality, the author has control over that one-to-one relationship. It becomes allegorical at that point. If a location within that story represents some location that's actually real on earth, then that's in the realm of the author. That's within his or her authority to proclaim that. We call that allegory. That is that image or that real object that exists outside of the cave. That's sub-element number one to theme. Number two is applicability. The applicability applies to you as the reader as that prisoner on the wall of the cave. Okay? It's your perception of reality. Okay? Of what is taking place within that story. Those are, most of the time, allegory and applicability are two distinct things, and they're separated by that line between the author and the reader. There are times where it kind of bridges the gap a little bit and they become one. It's rare, but it can happen. Okay? And so those are the two sub-elements to theme: applicability and allegory. Allegory, as Tolkien says, Professor Tolkien, allegory lies within the authority of the author. Applicability lies within the authority of the reader. The author intends one thing. He has the authorship, the authority, the authorship to state that is real, versus the reader who's on the wall of the cave perceiving it. We are all readers. We perceive different things from text, from the real world around us. Okay? That's called applicability. It's applicable to us depending upon our thoughts and our ideas and our experiences that are all unique within our own lives. Okay? All right. So I'm going to stop the video here. I really want you to think about those three sub-elements, or these three main elements: character, plot, and theme. Okay? Those are the three cornerstones of literary analysis, which you will be using throughout the rest of this course. Okay? So, and also Plato's Allegory of the Cave. So what do I want you to do with Plato's Allegory of the Cave? Well, I have one assignment that is due at the end of this week. And I want you to think about the things that I've talked about in this video. And I want you to use that as a basis for talking about a situation that has happened to you at some point in your life, where your perception of something that was real, maybe someone said something or did something to you, and then you perceived that action to be one thing, and then at some point later afterwards you realize, oh, that wasn't what happened. That wasn't the case. Okay? So your perception changed based on either something you learned firsthand or something that someone showed you. Okay? It's just basically a life experience question. So answer that question, upload it to Module 0 reading response number 1. It's a very short essay, 1 page or less. Okay? I don't need the whole novel about what happened, but just give me a brief synopsis, a brief overview of what happened, your experience, your perception. Write that down, put it in a Word document, upload it to the Dropbox. Okay? All right. So, again, Some of you may have a hard time or may have some difficulties getting the textbook. If that's the case, please reach out to me via email or text or phone. Let me know so I can assist you, or I can at least find you an alternative format. The bookstore should have that. If not, we will work around it. Okay. So remember, the things that you need to do for this week. One thing, write that reading response number 1 based on your understanding of this video on the lesson of Plato's Allegory of the Cave, based on your experience. Okay, something you perceived to be true, and then later on you found out it wasn't true. We've all had them. It's happened to all of us. Okay. All right. So what I will do afterwards, after I process this video and upload it, get it onto YouTube so that you can consume it, I will also post the PowerPoint video that explains all of these literary elements to you: character, plot, theme, the 3 major ones. There will also be some sub elements in there, okay, or some minor elements, not sub elements, minor elements. Those are my classification terms. Professors have different ways they group things. I have my own. Character, plot, theme, major. Then we have some other things that are minor. I'll talk about them in another supplemental video later this week, but it's not really pertinent for the activities that you're assigned to do this week. Okay. All right. So again, reading response number 1 due this week, this Friday, I believe, at 11:59. Okay. Use this video, use the PowerPoint that I'm going to post to write 1 page or less summary of the experience that you had where your perception turned out to be not true. Okay. All right. So having said that, I'll cut it off here. I'll talk to you guys later on this week in another video. I will post that when it's completed, giving you a little more information about the minor elements to literary analysis. Okay. All right. You guys have a good one. If you have any problems, reach out to me, email, phone, or text. Okay, I'm not going to put them on this video. Then I'll have everybody in the world communicate with, hey, what's going on? Don't need that. So remember, if you need my contact information, it's in the syllabus, available on the Blackboard content page. Okay. All right. You guys have a good one. I'll talk to you later.